So I want to turn to this, what you're kind of starting to get into already. What happens after the money goes out the door? Because there's a kind of paperwork difference, and this is where we get a little wonky. Now, a regular nonprofit that takes federal money files a form 990 or something with the IRS every year, right?
Right. So, and it essentially is part of their continuing to have their nonprofit status. They have to show that the money that they came in was spent on programming that they said they would provide to qualify to be a nonprofit. So
what does a church have to file?
Nothing. Religious organizations have to file that form. Churches don't have to file that form. Churches don't have to report anything to the federal government. They don't have to file anything.
So in 2017, and you've written about this as well, Focus on the Family, which is James Dobson's organization, we've talked about it in the past, reclassified itself as a church, right? So did the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Obviously, neither one is a congregation in any normal sense of the word. So why are they churches now?
Because they don't have to report anything to the government to be a church. Focus on the Family said it was to protect their donors.
Right.
And I mean, okay, I can see that if you're running a bunch of dark money through your church and funding, or through your organization and funding a bunch of dark money super PACs and all this kind of stuff. I can see why you wouldn't want anyone to know who your donors are. So, I want people to understand, and we don't have to talk in a bunch of accounting jargon and tax jargon to help you understand. Churches do not have to tell the federal government how much money they bring in. They do not have to tell the federal government where they spend it. They're not required to tell their congregations that. Some states require churches to file this information, and in theory, it can be accessed through FOIA requests, but not every state requires that. And courts have ruled consistently that they won't get involved in disputes if a congregant says, I think my church defrauded me, because that violates the separation of church and state.
Right. It's a tricky balance, and courts don't really want to weigh in.
Right. So there's really no recourse for people who may have given money to a church group and feel like they've been defrauded. There's no way to prove that the money is being spent on the things that the church says they're going to spend it on. And in a denominational sense, I'm not attacking all churches here. Plenty of churches do what they say they're going to do with the money they're given. In a denominational sense, even though the individual churches might not have to report anything to their government or their congregations, they have to report to their denomination and give a percentage of their takings to the denomination every year. So there is oversight in denominations. But then let's look at the Catholic Church and Opus Dei. Opus Dei got a carve out from this. They don't have to report this stuff to the Vatican. They don't have typical oversight in the Catholic Church, which is one of the things that Francis and now Leo are trying to change, because they take in all this money and have all these assets, and the Vatican has no idea what they are. And lawsuits are starting to happen at Opus Dei for human trafficking and other violations of human rights. And so the Vatican's like, this is not cool that you've had this carve out and you've not been reporting anything for decades.
Right.
The same thing happens in, you wonder why there are these big non-denominational mega churches around the country and why they're so popular, and why these personalist groups like Doug Wilson's group, get started, and why that's so attractive to these people. They don't have to report this stuff. Joel Osteen, it's the Church of Joel Osteen.
Right.
So he doesn't have to report his earnings to a denominational head or oversight group. So in those kinds of instances, the church I grew up in was an independent Baptist church. There was no oversight group. So this structure is very attractive to people who may have good intentions. I'm not saying every one of these churches is being corrupt either, but it's very attractive and tempting to people who could be wanting to do things like enrich themselves and defraud their congregations.
But none of those guys, Joel Osteen doesn't want to enrich himself. I mean, it is called the gospel of prosperity, but I digress. You wrote about city elders, that's the Oklahoma group that Mark Wayne belongs to. And I like also that I can just say Mark Wayne and everyone in our audience knows exactly who I'm talking about.
Right.
But Leon Rogers, Jesse Leon Rogers, who kept this church kind of alive on paper, and even though there was no congregation, I was kind of blown away by that story. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Well, the IRS has 14 different points that they consider when deciding whether to allow a religious entity to be a church. You don't have to meet all of them. It looks to me like you barely have to meet any of them to qualify with this government. So Jesse Leon Rogers got involved in a church a number of years ago, but he was not allowed to control the finances. He was not allowed to be a dictator. He was not allowed to expand the takings of the church, that he had oversight. He got really mad about it. So he went off and started his own church, which folded, but he kept the church alive on paper. And so that church exemption is what City Elders now classifies itself as a church with. So Jesse Leon Rogers is using that system to be very politically active with his City Elders group based on an old church designation that he got a number of years ago that he allowed to sit and not do anything with for a while.
And he's using the parsonage tax exemption on his family homes. Like it's a grift, but here's I think the broader point that we want to make with all of this, right? That number one, they want to give $1 billion to religious or Christian. There's that stupid thumb again.
It will be white Christian nationalist organizations.
Right.
So Catholic charities, for example, who are providing unhoused assistance for the unhoused migrants, they won't qualify.
Right.
Muslim organizations won't qualify.
Right.
Christian organizations that are progressive won't qualify. We have to help people understand who they're going to give this money to. It's not just general religious organizations.
Yep. And so we have the money that's going out to white Christian nationalist organizations. We also have the housing first policy being blown. Without that policy, there's essentially zero policy. There is no policy, right? We're going to give you the money if you qualify, and you'll qualify by being a white Christian nationalist organization. Mm-hmm. Then the third step of this is that a white Christian nationalist organization can categorize itself as a church, and you have no idea where that money goes. So it could be earmarked or on paper, theoretically, going towards housing for the unhoused. But a Christian church, a white Christian nationalist church, may say that the first step in, solving homelessness is reelecting Donald Trump. Or
they could say that. They could say the first step in solving this is pouring more money into evangelizing our community,
because
and dealing with our community sin problem.
Exactly. The cause of homelessness is sin. So they could say the first step in battling homelessness is tackling the problem of sin. And what is sin? I think y'all know what sin is, right? It is going against your husband. It is being gay or non-binary, or anything that doesn't align with what they are. That's sin. So this little weird wonky webinar is the whole picture, in my opinion.
Yeah. And as tough as it is to watch, people should watch it.